So let's get straight into it with the Derby della Madonnina. Inter 0, Milan 1. I'm not quite sure, Adam. I'm still confused as to how Milan won this game. Maybe it's because I was watching it with Inter fans and they've,
Probably.
infected me and made me more biased. But I thought this was the most classic Allegri FM smash and grab, filthy low block performance. But it worked, right?
100% works. As you allude to, from an XG point of view, if we want to point it from a stats point of view, Inter had far better of the shots in this game, creating 1.6 XG compared to Milan's 1.0 XG. And that was more fundamentally down to the way that they set up both sides. We knew, I personally knew that, Allegri wasn't going to take chances in this game. He would have loved it going into half time that it was still 0-0, despite the fact that Inter had a lot of the share of the main chances in the first half. It was a very edgy affair, it's fair to say. Lautaro, Marcus Thuram having the first effort within 2 minutes, a cross coming into the box, and his effort being saved by Maignan before Lautaro later in the half having a shot which was tipped onto the post by Maignan as well. So, Inter had the share of those chances in the first half. They looked probably the most threatening, but what I suppose typically Milan did was they tried to counter on the counter-attack, but they were nullified by the fact that what Chivu kind of probably got his team to do was work on the shape to ensure that if they were kind of making runs, that they also came back and ensured that there was men behind the ball, which made it difficult for Milan to penetrate and break through. And this is where they got undone in the second half, because ultimately what I saw was the shape was getting a bit more narrower. So it meant that a lot of the attacks were kind of focused down the middle, which unfortunately that's where the goal kind of came from, was just a simple break in terms of the possession in that middle of the pitch, allowed the ball to be threaded to Salamakers, who obviously runs in on goal, obviously with the kind of defensive line still within tax and within kind of distance of Sommer's goal. But that shot from Salamakers is rebounded off Sommer into the pathway of Pulisic, who tucks away and gives Milan the 1-0 lead. And from that moment onwards, you knew that this was going to be a defensive wall from Milan perspective. They did everything they did to ensure that they held their lines. They almost gave it away with the penalty from Pavlovic on Marcus Thuram, and Çalhanoğlu again gets his penalty saved in this kind of encounter. But this time you have to give plaudits to Maignan for that save. That was epic. I did feel that was going to happen, though, because of the way that he was standing in his goal. But that said, Inter had a lot of the chances, but they just couldn't get the ball in the back of the net, despite putting Bone, Esposito as well, and even changing the personnel in midfield in the likes of Zielinski coming on, for example. And even our man Diouf, who we haven't seen
we saw
for
it.
the majority of this. We actually saw him, and he took a shot from distance that almost did something different. So, yeah, I think for me, there's got to be questions about the mentality of Inter in terms of the way they apply themselves, because off the back of this match, Chivu alluded to the fact that he was happy with the performance. I'm not too sure if that was the right kind of phrase or terminology to use off the back of that defeat. But we also have to give credits for Milan for the fact that they did that job professionally. They got out of there with 3 points, and they look like they're going to be now in the Scudetto hunt because they're able to shut up shop and win these important games. So, Rory, how did you see it?
I saw it ultimately because obviously, listening, I was watching it. I had a few people around my house. It was a bit boozy. It was a bit, everybody having a good time. And before the game, maybe I was just feeling super optimistic post-Arsenal, but I was like, Inter will do these. These are shy. Milan are crap. Like, Inter will do these easy. And all of them turned around to me and were like, we've got a really experienced manager in Allegri coming up against a very inexperienced manager in Chivu. They were like, this is not going to be easy. And I think they were right. But I think that was where the line was drawn, really. I think this is what we're looking at, a manager who is super experienced, has made these performances his trademark, and has been preparing this team the entire week or the entire 2 weeks for, this is how we're going to scum our way through to this. And you know what? That is, everybody is absolutely within their rights to play football however they like. I'm not having a go at them for this. But he knows how to work that system, right? Chivu, his record in big games this season hasn't been particularly good, right? We were talking pre-record, just double-checking, but they lost to Juve. They've They lost to Napoli. Like, they only narrowly beat Roma. Like, his record in big games hasn't been great. And I think that's where this came down to, really, because once Inter were behind, there was no plan B. There was no concerted, like, it kind of feels like, and I'm going to go back to like kind of a Premier League comparison, but with Liverpool at the minute, when they can't score, Slot just throws on all the attacking players and goes, right, hopefully that'll fix it, right? And I think that's kind of what Chivu did. There was no like, okay, we can exploit this link. We can, if we bring on this player, he can do that. It was just, okay, who are the attacking players on the bench? Right, stand up. Okay, you guys are coming on. Like, and when there was a lack of clear idea for Inter, even when they did have chances, it was all kind of predictable. It wasn't like Milan, they rode their luck, but it wasn't massively uncomfortable. There was no like clear plan B of like, right, this is how we can get past this low block. This is how we can crack them open. And I think that's managerial experience, and that's coaching experience, that's tactical experience. So I think that's what it's ultimately come down to. And I have to say, a large slice of luck and a very good goalkeeping performance. Like, because I think Inter hit the bar, hit the post a couple of times. I think the big moment for me is that Maignan save from Martinez, where he turns it onto the post. When that happened, I was like, Inter aren't scoring today. Like, and I think that was pre-penalty, that save, right? That was before the penalty.
That was in the first half. That was in the first half.
Yeah, exactly. And even then I thought, I don't think it's going to be Inter's day. And then with that penalty, the way he baited Çalhanoğlu into going into that side is just fucking genius. Like, you can look like a fucking prick if he just sticks at the side that you're stood on.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But he gambled and he looks like a fucking genius. And I think, but those are the things that this hinged on, right? I think it's tactical nous and experience from Allegri, a world-class goalkeeping performance, who's been arguably Milan's best player of the season so far. Maignan is like right up there. And then being clinical when you do get your attack, right? Helped by a goalkeeper who's not in particularly good form. And again, that's another thing where these comparisons between the two teams are just a bit more stark. Like, we've talked about it before, but with the semi-final in the Champions League last year, Sommer single-handedly gets them through to the final, whatever. I just find it fascinating, the drop-off that has happened with him as well, where his performances have just got so average, and so like, he's making saves he should save, but then he's not shocking you anymore or surprising you. It's just a run-of-the-mill goalkeeper. So I think this is where it's kind of come down to. That was quite a long answer, I suppose. If we're going to go for, should we talk, we'll praise Milan first, right, before we kind of slag off Inter. I think we should try and be positive. With Milan, I think that midfield definitely worked. We talked on our Patreon about Rabiot coming back, could be a huge thing. I think that did make a big difference in this game. And we saw Batisaghi at wing-back getting the nod ahead of Stupinian, something else we said could be a good move. And I think the wing-backs definitely won the battle in this game, because it's something we were talking about in the preview, but Sailor-Makers and Batisaghi definitely had the better of it, I think.
Yeah, it was one of the points that I made on Batisaghi. I felt like he was the much more defensively aligned kind of player that you needed in that position, especially if you've got a marauding Pavlovic, which we didn't see as much of in this game, it's fair to say, but I think you needed that kind of solidity from a wing-back position. As we alluded to, Espanan has been much more fluid in terms of attacking third, but maybe not as good at his defensive duties in comparison to Batisaghi. And the form that Batisaghi has kind of shown since the Coppa Italia tie against Lecce he's been such a great player that's come through from the shadows, and I think he's well deserving of that place. I'd also allude to the fact that Pulisic, when he had those moments, he was very clever on the ball, very cute, and even in that second half, as much as we allude to the fact that they didn't have much of the opportunity, I felt he was one of their threats. He was always putting Inter's kind of tracking players onto the back foot, and he had that shot from distance that almost crept into that bottom corner, and had that gotten in, again, that was, before we actually saw the eventual goal. But yeah, I thought there was warning signs already there. It was interesting also Modric's kind of involvement, because he kept the ball. He wasn't necessarily like involved as much as possibly we anticipated in this match, but he just made sure that the ball was ticking over for Milan when they got gain position. But more importantly, I think what was interesting was, and this is typical Allegri thing, but they keep their shape. They massively focus on keeping shape. And as long as you're disciplined to keeping it within the system itself, it makes it harder for the other team to do much with it because you've got men behind the ball. And even if we're saying in this scenario, the fact was that Inter weren't clever enough to work out a different way of trying to break down this defense, you can't do anything about it because you've got such a defensive solid wall. So I think that really helps Milan in terms of making sure they went out with a point. I didn't think there was much in the attacking kind of lineup from Milan's perspective, but the one and only chance that they had, they took it, and that was the most important thing. Whereas, yeah, maybe there's question marks about, I don't know about you, but as much as Thuram was kind of the focal point for a lot of the attacks, didn't necessarily felt that he imposed himself as much as I would have liked him to have done. Lautaro seems a bit quiet for my liking. As I mentioned, I think maybe by introducing Thuram, it disrupted the flow that the players had in the previous games with Esposito and Lautaro potentially, and even Bonnet to an extent when he played. I felt like they were able to exploit the space a little bit more, whereas they seem very narrow. And maybe that's also down to the fact that they didn't have Denzel Dumfries to go on that right-hand side, which offers that natural width and also strength and power because he is such a tall player as well. So he offers that kind of aerial threats in certain scenarios as well, whereas you don't get that necessarily as much with Augusto. Augusto's much more on his feet, isn't he, when he's taking chances as well. So, but yeah, I do wonder if there's that mental fragility within that Inter squad at the moment because they don't have, for me, Rory, that tackling demanding midfielder. And it feels that was what was missing from this performance was someone that could just break up the ball naturally and just allow the other midfielders to bomb forward because I thought Barella had a really good performance in this game. And I thought he was one of the few that was outstanding from an Inter perspective. That said, DeMarco was fairly quiet. I think he was fairly anonymous in this game. I didn't see much of Bastoni as well. Bastoni, I felt like it was only really late on that we started to see him maraud in terms of the final third. But again, we didn't see much from him as well. So I think you look at it, there's a combination of we didn't see performances from an Inter perspective. There's that kind of fragility. And I think, to your point as well, Chivu didn't have a clue. He really didn't know what to do. And I think that's the worrying thing from an Inter fan perspective is you think, right, going forward, is he the man to take you forward? I'm not too sure at this stage.
Yeah, I think, look, they're still like, it's a big defeat and it's like, it'll bruise the ego, but I think Inter are still in the Scudetto race as much as Milan are for me. Like, I still think this doesn't really change my opinion on either of the sides. I still think Inter are a better team than Milan. I just think that they had a worse performance than Milan in this game.
Yeah.
So I don't think my opinions have changed much, but I think with Chivu, I'm still, obviously it's a super open field for the Scudetto this year, so he could win the Scudetto with them, right? And then you're like, okay, he's a Scudetto winning manager, we have to. But my expectations for him are still get them into Champions League. That's what he's there to do, and that's what I think he'll do, at minimum. And then they're giving themselves time to find out if this is a manager that takes them elsewhere, or what they're probably doing is searching currently and looking for who's the manager that's going to be brought in next year, right?
I think so.
I think he'll be fine at steady in the ship. He'll get them through. He could win them the Scudetto, but we're not going to see, like, blockbuster big wins against big teams. I just don't think we might get one this year towards the end of the season when he's learned a few lessons and maybe he gets a big scalp against Juve or something, but I think we're going to see them beat the teams they should beat and then maybe struggle against the teams that are around them. And yeah, it's his first big managerial job. If they won the Scudetto, it would be a huge surprise. And you're up against a manager in Allegri who, I know we keep talking about it, but only has one game a week and is one of the most experienced managers in the league and, has the ability to get more out of this squad than he is getting. Even though they were super clinical, like they had one chance, they took it, they won the game, I still don't think this Rafa Leao up front thing is quite working. I know he's inconsistent, and I know I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about slagging him off because I think he could be so much better than he is. But I was really disappointed with his performance again yesterday. I thought he was just so lackadaisical, lost the ball, wasn't really like incisive or direct. It was all just a bit slow. And I think if you're going to play this type of football and this is going to be your game plan, you're lucky you've got Pulisic there who has been just an incredible player for them and is super clinical. Because if you're relying on Leao, he doesn't
you don't know what day of the week he's going to turn up.
So I thought he was a super disappointing performance when the whole game was set up to suit him, right? You're literally playing a game plan that should play into his hands completely. And he just goes anonymous. Like, I just think it really, really stood out to me. But then we have to praise the Milan defense, right? We have to talk about the defense. We have to talk about Gabbia, who's having an incredible season. Tomori, love that he's revived back in Milan and is in favour again and is playing great football. And Pavlovic, that back three and then four with Maignan is looking pretty formidable at the moment and looking like baby steps, but it could be a good concrete foundation to build on, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people were slagging off Pavlovic before the season had even kicked off because off the back of last season when they signed him, they thought he was one of the first ones out the door, personally. But Allegri, and I remember calling this out, I did feel that Pavlovic was an Allegri-style defender that he would get the most out of. And it does feel like now, because of the fact that he's also, trying to provide an attacking outlet on occasions, that is something what is valued by Allegri, that he's not just a defender, but he's able to be strong with possession and, offer something different. In Gabbia, you do feel that the defensive line is a lot more solid with him there. So I think naturally he seems to command that kind of defensive line really well, and the fact that he is a Milan boy, then that also helps him in terms of that fan piece. And as you allude to, Tomori's kind of resurrection, it feels like, because he's gone through a 2-year period, I would say, where he hasn't played to his very best. It's been really very quiet. We know there's a good defender in him because we saw it in that Scudetto season that they won, right? But since that period, we've not really seen him kick on. He had that call up to England, and outside of that, he's had 1 or 2 good performances, but then he's been largely inconsistent, it's fair to say, and it's not helped by injuries.
That clearly haven't fancied him as well. Like, they just weren't picking him
hugely as well. But I think he adds the dynamic that Allegri wants, which is pace, quality in terms of the possession, but is also very strong, good command of his area, and he's adapting in terms of being that kind of free-flowing defensive kind of lineup, because he's not only a central defender in that but you can also play on that right hand side and give a bit more of a dynamism on that side in terms of also covering for Salamakers, which we did see on some of the occasions. I felt that he was really good in that respect. But Mike Maignan, what a performance, what a season he's already having, and again showing us what we know is there. We just need to see it again, a bit like Tomori, a bit more on a consistent basis. But this season you can definitely say he's without doubt. I mean, I can't really name too many goalkeepers that have done really well apart from Sevilla and himself. So I think that really goes to show you that actually Mike Maignan, what a commanding goalkeeper he is. And I suppose the scenario is for Milan now that they risk losing him on a free transfer at this moment in time. So they really need to sort that situation out before the end of the season. But
he single-handedly won them. He's single-handedly at least won them 6 points here now in the Roma game, and then here, just in those penalty saves, he's at least picked them up 6 points. I think, I don't know fully what the contract situation is there, if he has just said firmly no, or if they are still slightly renegotiating, or there is the doors still open, whatever these Fabrizio Romano terms that we all use now. But we were talking about it again pre-record. I can just see him moving on a free to Chelsea next year, unfortunately. But if I'm Milan, I'm really, really trying quite hard to get his agent in a room at the moment, because this could be a guy that's playing for a new contract, right? These could be performances that are, I want an extra 0 on that signing on fee or whatever, right? But he's one of the best goalkeepers in the world on his day, absolutely. If he stays fit and continues that form consistency, he will be the best goalkeeper in the world. Like, I think you should be doing everything to lock him down, because, like I said, he's single-handedly winning you games here at this point. Like, because if it's not for 2 or 3 saves he makes in this game, Inter win this 2 or 3-1, right? And it's a completed. So I think you have to be getting everything for him. Last thing, I suppose, let's talk about Inter a little bit. I suppose I was really disappointed with how slow it was. It was very, very slow. It felt like at times I was like, why is everybody walking? Why is, like, there was so many breaks, and I say breaks being quite generous, where the wing-backs were just ambling forward. There was no, like, runs off the ball. There was no, like, desperation to get back into the game, apart from maybe the last 10 minutes when you're just like, okay, shit's hitting the fan. But, like, I just felt it was so slow. And I think that is something that Chivu needs to address, right? Is this Like, dai ragazzi, svegliati, wake up a bit, come on. Like, I just thought that was super disappointing.
Yeah, ultimately, I didn't think they set the tempo right from the very off. I felt like actually they should have been more kind of trying to enforce Milan to struggle in their own half, because if, as we allude to, they like to counter teams, but actually if you suffocate them, I think they struggle with holding on to possession, and I think you force more errors. So they could have benefited from the team playing on the higher line, potentially, probably playing to the negative of Inter's defensive aspects, because when you've got a Cherby holding the line, that's probably the last person you want to be kind of chasing back, right? But equally, you've got a Kanji, you've got Bastoni, there's probably two kind of able, kind of pacier and certainly better commanding defenders. But we didn't see enough of that. We didn't see enough of them trying to push their like counterparts. I didn't feel like, for me, I felt where the battle was lost was in that midfield, as you allude to. It's just the fact that they didn't really impose themselves. I don't know also if you look at the midfield lineup, I don't know if they're too similar in terms of the respect of what you expect them to do, because they're very possession based, but they need runners, as you allude to. I don't think in Augusto or DeMarco you're going to get people that are running to create those opportunities. They're not very quick on that.
Quicker than that, honestly. I was
no, he's not been the quickest. He's not very quick.
Quick. I was like,
you've got to remember, he's like the David Beckham. He's one of those players that deceptively looks really good, and he's got a good delivery. But apart from that, he's not very. Don't ask him to do left back duty, because he wouldn't be very good at that, basically. And you can't expect him to run up and down that wing, because you can tell that he is stamina wise, he can't keep up with it. We've got Gusto maybe a little bit more, but again, I just felt like you didn't have that attacking threat. So again, this alludes to the fact that Chivu maybe misread the situation. You know, he played it maybe too safe for me, in terms of he was just focusing on a possession-based game, which I think played into Milan's hands a bit more. But I think if you look at the options that he had on the bench, there wasn't a huge amount that he could have maybe necessarily changed it up, because they're very similar in terms of style. I would have potentially just changed the shape of how you went about it personally. I would have had Piotr Zielinski in that, just purely because you want him to be that like number 10, one that's just behind the front two, and maybe just give someone like a Modric or a Rabiot someone to think about, because they're having to track someone back, and that potentially then allows the players like your Barellas, like your Çalhanoğlu's, to then pick up the ball and maybe dictate what they do with it a little bit more, because I felt like you say, the build-up was so slow that it didn't really allow that opportunity to happen. So I just felt like maybe Chivu, as you alluded to, just didn't have a plan B, didn't have a clue of what to do differently, and I think that ultimately cost it into the game.
Yeah, I think it's that simple. And when a team comes with a low block and they're just waiting, the slower the game, the better for them, because they're just not getting pulled out of shape, and you have to speed it up. You have to be able to speed it up against those teams to try and get them out of shape. So I think Inter massively played into their hands. A big bruise for Inter, I think, a massive knock to the ego. But that does mean that Milan are currently 2 points off top in second place, with Inter down in fourth, 1 point